It was very timely, and we did receive the emails, and we'll do our best that we can to prove that tonight. But I released this early. It Sam had an email roll in that got to Jeremy, my producer, and we released it. And I think we did the right thing. There's a lot of distrust within the government. There's a lot of distrust within, especially the FBI. And we've seen attack after attack, the Vegas shooting. We saw the Covenant disaster that happened at the school, and none of these manifestos ever get released. And so we wanted to make sure that this thing got released. It did get released, and through our show. And nobody seems to trust the mainstream media anymore. And I think I did the right thing. I know I did the right thing. And even after that, we immediately got the information to the FBI, so that they can do whatever they need to do with it, which is hopefully dig into this and find what the hell was going on. But um, so we got a whole list of speakers here tonight. I'll just make some introductions here. Um, Shawn Ryan here, former Navy SEAL, former CIA contractor, host Shawn Ryan Show. Then we got my producer, Jeremy Watkins, retired surface warfare officer in the Navy. We got Sam Shoemate, which everybody knows, the Army Intel Warrant Officer. Scott Mann will be in here soon. Retired Lieutenant Colonel Green Beret, very tied into intelligence. Former CIA analyst slash targeter. Sarah Adams, who I'm sure everybody knows. We have Jordan Carr, former Air Force intelligence. Rob Green, active duty surface warfare officer, is in here. He'll be speaking tonight. He's the one that actually got the story to us, to Jeremy. We got Kyle Serefin, former FBI. We got Tim Parlatore, former Navy JAG officer and my current attorney. We got Dale Stark, who will be joining us, who also interviewed Sam, I believe, right about 24 hours after I interviewed him. Dale's a former A-10 pilot and drone pilot. We got, excuse me if I say this wrong, Matt Tardio, former Green Beret. Um, Tim Burchett will be joining us. He's a congressman out of Knoxville, Tennessee. He sent me a message that said he also received some emails from, it sounds like, from him. So he's going to come on hopefully and speak tonight. He's also put a lot of stuff in motion within Congress to stop the massive funding that the government's doing in the Taliban, and we discussed that several times on my show with Scott Mann, Sarah Adams, and Tim Burchett, and Eli Crane, and Legend, and Masood, who is the commander of the NRF, National Resistance Front in Afghanistan, fighting off the Taliban. We have Guido, who's a former Dutch intel officer and the author of AQ 2.0. And lastly, we have the anti-hero podcast guys coming on. Brent Tucker, he's former Delta operator, and he also received an email on their podcast from the bomber, and sent that to me so that we could scrub our tens of thousands of messages that we get on there, to see if we received social media traffic from Matthew Livesberger, and we did both on the Shawn Ryan account, my personal account, and on Shawn Ryan Show Instagram. So, which we posted those. So, um, I know there's a lot of other people that want to come on here, but there's a lot of kind of rhetoric going on online about this, and everybody that's on here that's going to get a chance to speak is a true professional. I only deal with professionals. I don't deal with internet trolls. I'm not going to deal with that kind of shit. So everybody that you'll be listening to tonight is a real professional in one way or another. So already went through why I released it, but and kind of how that came about. So just to tell that story again for everybody that's kind of chiming in. Walked in the morning when I was getting ready to interview. Jeremy, my co-host, told me about the story. Said that Sam really did not want to come on the show and was really kind of nervous to do it. So we applied a little bit of pressure and kind of talked him into it because all three of us thought it was really important, and he could have been spending time with his family that he was flying to go see at the time. But we talked him into coming on. We thought it was really important, and and so he came on. We talked him into coming on. I conducted an interview with a medical doctor that day. Then when I got done, my phone was blown up with messages from people that have been contacted by Army CID, which is basically the Army's version of the FBI. And where's my notes here? So just for the record, we were contacted, and these are just the people that are probably in here right now listening, but CID contacted Tim Kennedy, texted me about it, and got me in touch with David Butler, who is the public affairs officer of the chief, the Joint Chief of Staff of the Army. And so I got in touch. I got Butler's contact info, gave it to Jeremy and my attorney, Tim Parlatore, to contact him. I didn't want to talk to him. I don't trust any of these people. Jeremy and Tim will talk on that here in a few minutes. The Scott Mann was contacted by CID and contacted me. Chris Peranto was contacted by CID and got in contact with me. Bo Ebenson, who used to video my show, was contacted by Clay Jensen, who was contacted by CID, and then the actual operative that we redacted from the show, which is why you see the whatever those are, those little lines that show spelling errors and the cursor. We had to redact some stuff out of that email to we didn't want to blow anybody's cover. Like I said, I'm a professional. I've worked in intelligence, obviously, and no matter what the story is, I am absolutely 100% not going to blow an operative's cover, especially when he is currently serving overseas. That's just absolutely asinine for anybody to do that. And so that gets us kind of into the email. That's why the email, we had copied and pasted the email into Apple Notes to redact that name and the name of the major that was in there. And so when we did that, it automatically showed spelling errors. And if that makes any sense to anybody, and the space at the bottom where the picture, where there's like a little blank space, that's where the coordinates were. We pulled that and put it in a separate screen in the video so that you guys could see that in a way that was blown up a little bit, so it was a little bit more visible. The cursor that showed up that was in the screenshot, again, that's because it was in notes, so that we could screenshot or redact the names and put that in the actual episode and release it so that everybody could see that. And I want to say that the reason, look, obviously Livisberger had some some stuff that he wanted to get out, and we had mentioned at the beginning of the show that we could not verify that any of this stuff that was in that email was actually true or not, but we thought it was important to get it out to the public because if it would have went to the FBI, guess what, guys? It probably would have never hit the public. And like I'd mentioned at the beginning of this, there's been time and time again where people want manifestos released. Covenant School shooting here in Nashville is a perfect example. Everybody wanted that released and they wouldn't release it. Now everybody's pissed off because we released the fucking email. So we did say that at the very beginning of the podcast that we couldn't verify if the information there was accurate, but there were a lot of things that lined up, like the operative that wanted his name redacted. He also hit me on LinkedIn. We had to black his name out, black his phone number out. Like I said, I'm not going to blow anybody's cover. That's just a big no-no in the intel world. So hopefully there's at least a couple people out there that can respect the fact that we um, pulled through for him and did not blow his cover. But anyways, Jeremy, I'm gonna kick it over to you here for a minute. And is Tim on here yet?
He is. I've got to get Jordan in as a co-host to help me out here. Can you add that while I pass it over to Sam real quick?
Yeah.
You passing it off to me now, Jeremy?
Yes, please.
Okay. Didn't get a framework for what I'd be saying here tonight, so I'm kind of winging it right now. I just posted a screen record. I recommend you go look at my timeline. I screen recorded my Proton Mail app, and I walked through the timeline. I dropped everything down as specific as I possibly could to show when this stuff came in, okay? There's been a lot of big names and influencers out there coming after my credibility, attacking me, claiming that I fabricated this email. Of all the things you could attack me for, fabrication of the email doesn't make sense to me, simply because so many people have seen it at this point. The FBI has commented on it and everything else, but that is what it is. So they've come after me personally, attacking me, and I basically made the conjecture, and I want to get this single point across tonight. When you watch that video and you show the timeline, and there's no squiggle lines or anything else, this is a direct screen record of my Proton Mail app. And when you see the timeline, you will see that this person, who is either Matt or claims to be Matt, reached out to me on Sunday after they first contacted me on Instagram. They reached out on Sunday and sent that first message. You can read it directly in there. It's everything is very easy to read. I spent plenty of time recording this. You go to the next message, and he gives the manifesto. He breaks down the manifesto, and that was on Tuesday, December 31st. Now, here's the thing. There are three options in my mind. Either I'm a fortune teller, and I can see the future, and I knew that he was going to do this thing, and I fabricated these emails to send them to myself before the action with proven timestamps, or I'm a deep state operative. I'm part of the CIA or whatever spooky services out there, and this was a very well coordinated and put together scheme to psyop the country, or I'm exactly who I say I am. I'm a recently retired Army veteran who has run a military whistleblower social media page for the last 4.5 years. I have dozens of articles that mention my name in them, and anybody who's halfway decent at doing a little bit of a deep dive can look into that and see that there are years of articles with my name mentioned in them as a source or whatever else. I would tend to go with the latter, but I understand how the internet is, and I want you to understand that a lot of the nonsense you're seeing out there is based on poor research, such as the squiggly lines on the Apple Notes page. This stuff could have been. I understand conspiracies, though, so I'll leave you with that. Whoever's up next, go ahead and take it, and I'll be happy to answer any questions. I'll say this last thing. I've tried to be as transparent as possible. I've given headers. I don't understand a lot of these things. So as far as somebody explained to give the headers from it, and basically all it did was say that it was a Proton Mail to a Proton Mail. I've taken screenshots of the box. I just recorded the video earlier. I've done everything I can to show you that this email was factually sent to me on these dates from this person who claims to be Matt Libelsberger, an individual who I didn't care about. That meant nothing to me until I read the news the next day. Well, until technically somebody sent me the news 2 days after the fact in the morning. But that name meant nothing to me, and I ignored the email initially until I saw, wow, this guy in my email is the same guy, allegedly, who committed these attacks. I'll leave you with that.
Shawn, do you mind if I jump in there?
Yeah, 1 second. I just want to say too that Vegas PD was aware of the email that we received on the podcast and talked about on the podcast, and they specifically said that they have strong evidence to me that the email was sent prior to the death, and we also received the email in my Zendesk, which is our customer service support that's attached to the website. We posted that. We posted the email from my G's personal on SRS. Brent Tucker, like I said, from the Anti-Hero podcast, sent me the email that they received from it. Tim Burchett, who hopefully is in here at some point, is going to talk about emails he received. But yeah, Matt, go ahead.
Yeah, so I'm going to start off by saying this: like, you guys 1,000% did the right thing by releasing that information in the time manner in which you did, and in the manner in which you did. You just presented it as you knew it being factual to you, that you guys ended up getting that email, that it came through, and it's a good thing that you did that, because now we have people from Anti-Hero, that have searched their inbox and are seeing similar messages as to what you had posted earlier about the email that you had received as it comes through. It's important in that aspect for people to keep in mind because of one of two things. Either number one, and I think Shoe ended up coming out with like a very good way of framing this, that either Leibelsberger, or who was allegedly Leibelsberger that ended up sending that email. I think it's very important to keep in that context. When we start analyzing this and we start looking at it, and the reason I'm happy it's documented and has been put out the way in which it did, is if it ends up coming out that Leibelsberger is not the one that ended up generating that email, then we have a lot of questions, because we do have timestamps and we do have the dates in which those emails were sent ahead of time. So if there is a conspiracy that's involved in this, if everyone wants to put on or take off their tinfoil hat, I don't care. But if there is a conspiracy that's involved in it, you did the right thing by making sure that it is documented ahead of time for all of that to be put out. If it's not a conspiracy theory and Leibelsberger did in fact send those messages, that's documented as well, and we have that on record. So that's very important to understand. The other thing that I'd like to bring up is, my role, my involvement as it goes into this situation with being a former team member, albeit for a very short period of time with Matt. But in addition to that, the information that got disclosed to me ahead of time, back in December, times two, that's twice, of active duty Green Berets who are associated not with just myself, but also Leibelsberger as well. And that information should not be public record. Like Shawn is saying, we're not going to go about and disclose information of people who are currently, out there doing the Lord's work for our nation. But those are all factual things that have been reported, and you're more than welcome to look into it. And so there, in my opinion, at least, there's a lot more that's going on here than to what meets the eye. And I'm not jumping into a conspiracy theory by any means, but I'm very happy that Shawn Ryan, I am happy that Jeremy, I'm happy that Shoe, everybody was able to come forward with this information and present it, because however the cards may fall from this point forward, you guys did honest reporting on what it was that you had at the time that you had it. If people want to throw in conspiracy theories about squiggly lines, so on and so forth, etc., that's on them, and they're going to have to defend their own BS afterwards. You guys have your own records, you have your own documents, and you would be stupid to try to go forward and pretend like those emails didn't exist, that you didn't receive them, because obviously people like Anti-Hero Podcasts, obviously, other people are going to start coming forward as they dig through their inboxes and then end up finding them. So I'm going to leave it at that for the time now.
Hey, Shawn, can you add Jeremy back as a co-host? And real quick, for people that are requesting to speak, it's looking a little glitchy on my end. It might be the same on Jeremy's, which is probably why he was dropped. So please be patient.
Hey, let me add something before we continue any further. And I should have said this at the very beginning of the Shawn Ryan podcast, and I should have said this at the very beginning tonight. But I want to make this very clear. Matt kind of reminded me of this. Whatever Matt was dealing with, whatever Matt Livelsberger was dealing with, as far as where he was at in his headspace, he was somebody's family member. He was somebody's teammate. He had friends. He had family. Like, I want to offer my condolences to those folks right off the bat, because I deal with service members. I have been for years dealing with service members who are struggling from moral injury from what we've gone through for decades in combat, the moral injury from the Afghan withdrawal, and what I've been told is that he was struggling with stuff, and whatever the case was, this was a human being who served his country honorably for years, and I don't want to take away from that. And I want his family and friends to know that, hey, my deepest condolences to you. And if I said anything or I did anything disrespectful to dishonor him, I apologize. immediately. So I want everybody to know that. I am in no way attacking this guy, but I felt like the information was so important it had to come forward. And I just want to say that.
Yeah, and I'd like to add on top of that, Shoot, like in addition to that, he's a very well respected and dedicated Green Beret. From the time in service that I knew him to all of the people that I'm currently talking to that do know him on a professional level right now, they have absolutely nothing but good things to say. Whether or not the issues with his family are factual, that is up for debate at this current point in time. But from everybody's general standpoint, until something official gets put out, I would just ask that in an attempt to ease some pain and suffering that's taking place within that family, to let that kind of go away and just focus on the facts at hand versus rumor intelligence that's going to end up smearing or clouding information and actual facts that are taking place.
Appreciate that, gents. Jeremy, is Tim in yet?
He is. We're trying to get him a speaker credit here. In the meantime, if I can just ask Kyle to talk about the process for sending the note to the FBI and why that us.
That got glitchy, but I got the gist of it. What, if you don't mind, Jeremy? I'm actually going to toss it over to Rob Green since he called me on Thursday, and I'll just let him say how he introduced me into any of this.
Yeah, appreciate that. Now, for context, real quick, I think my role here was very small, just connecting dots, connecting people. But I do. The reason I was involved in this is because of going back with Sam now for several years and trying to get at DoD corruption. I mean, the Department of Defense is sort of the gorilla in the room as it goes to government overreach and some of the problems that we have. And so we've seen now for years senior military leaders, our admirals and generals, harming service members, trampling their rights, betraying their trust. And then we have whistleblowers that they go after, they retaliate against. And so that's how I got connected with Sam and how we started building out networks of whistleblowers, networks of sources, trying to help hold people accountable however we could do it internally at first. And we realized that the institution, our admirals and generals, they protect themselves, they protect their careers, they protect the institution before the Constitution. And so we started going to the American people as much as we could. So that's the role, how we got connected. And then that morning, after Sam was informed that, hey, this is the same guy, he reached out to me to get in touch. He knew that I had contact with Jeremy because Jeremy and I connected over the COVID vaccine mandates in the military a couple of years before that. So he knew that I was in contact with him. So he asked to get in contact with Shawn Ryan. And then that's where, as Sam and I were talking through it that morning, the best thing to do, I said, hey, let's take a pause on this. Don't just call, FBI field office cold. Let me pull in Kyle. Kyle and I have connected. He's done an awesome job for so many of us service members, DoD whistleblowers, helping us raise awareness on some of the things going on in the DoD. I mean, he's doing an awesome job in the FBI too, but he's lending some of his support to us in the DoD as well. So I made sure to say, hey, Kyle's going to point us in the right direction. He knows the players here. And so I was able to connect Kyle to Sam to make sure that we got this into the right hands because there's still a lot of good FBI agents out there. So that's a good point at which to kick it over to you, Kyle.
Sure. Sounds good. Okay. So by way of background, I worked for the FBI from 2016. I got out. Actually, I was suspended forever in late April of 2022. I was eventually removed, or I think they threatened me with termination, and I quote unquote resigned after 14 months of no pay and not being able to show up. I'd sold my house. I left the area where I was supposed to be working because I didn't work there anymore. That was April of 2023. I launched a podcast. I went on some interviews and stuff like that. So that's kind of who I am. Before all that happened, I did whistleblower activity that brought some things to Congress. I brought some things privately. Some of them actually are getting more and more relevant, and I'm going to probably bring this up later on with some other people. But the stuff that Sarah's talking about right now, some of the infiltration, some of the things that have come into our country were relevant to me back in 2021, and I brought that information to Congress, including the Afghan refugees. So that's kind of who I am. But the most important thing is that during that time, this was a combination of whistleblower activity and the fact that we were saying no thank you to the COVID vaccine, which a lot of people in the FBI lost their jobs. or at least they were threatened with them. I rounded up a group of people that were willing to kind of go on the line and say, hey, I'm not going to do this. And also, we're going to support each other. And it was upwards of 300 people. It was a signal group. I'm sure it was infiltrated by the FBI's investigations, the internal inspection division. But what we found were a lot of people that were willing to step up and say, here's some information about what's going on wrong. These were all policy things. I got to have a pretty robust group of folks that understood right and wrong. Let's just leave it at that. So when Rob called me on Thursday morning, this is going back at the beginning or last week, Thursday morning, 8:45, I'm sitting at the breakfast table. Rob calls. He said, hey, you know Sam? I said, yeah, I know of Sam. We haven't spoken before, but I understand what Sam's about, and I understand that he's reputable. He's like, he's got this piece of information. It needs to get into the FBI's hands. Can you babysit this into the right spot? Can you make a connection so we're not just throwing it into what's called NTALK? If you guys don't know, if you go to the tip line, it goes to West Virginia. It goes to a low-level analyst. It could get lost in the thing. If you're not sending him a January 6th lead, it probably just disappears. So you want to make sure you get it into the right hands. I said, yeah, give me a few minutes. I'll get back to you with the number. Made a couple calls, called some of those agents from that 300 group that I was talking about, and started saying, hey, find me a reputable CT agent. Initially, I thought we needed to go to Denver because I thought that's where Matt was based out of. Eventually, they actually ended up getting me an agent, which was the supervisor in charge of the squad in Las Vegas. And the reason I'm giving you this background and the timeline is because there's a couple things that happened. Right after I found somebody in Vegas, which ended up being the squad supervisor that's doing the investigation into the explosion at Trump Tower, I talked to Sam, and his first statement to me was, I don't want to do this, and I don't really want to take it public. In fact, I would love to just give it to Shawn Ryan and let them run with it, but they're probably not going to want to just take something in a vacuum. And I told him, yeah, you're going to want to get out there and put your face on it, even though you don't necessarily want to do that. And Sam's initial thing that he told me, this was in the first 10 minutes we spoke, is that essentially everyone's going to call him part of the Glow Fed op, because that's what happens if you bring information forward. The problem that we're dealing with right now is so much distrust in the American media and the social media environment, and so many people feel like they've been betrayed by our government, that they look around and they say, we want transparency. And then when someone acts transparently, you're like, oh, you're in on it because it's not exactly what you wanted to hear. And you're looking to punch through. Everybody wants to find the PSYOP, but maybe the PSYOP is that you just don't believe honest people. So I just want to tell you from the beginning, that's what Sam brought forward. And he was 100% credible to me on that. He never shared the document with me, which is on purpose. And I had to share that with the FBI. I didn't want to know. It was none of my damn business at that time. And I was not really interested in the details. I knew I could wait until Shawn and Sam sat down and had the conversation and shared it with the world. Now, here's the really important part about this stuff. If you just give something into the black hole that is the FBI, even with a warm lead, and you give it over to the supervisor, the SSA, in charge of the counterterrorism squad in Las Vegas, if they start asking questions and they start pushing down on someone like a Sam and say, hey, this is why we want you to keep that quiet, there's the possibility that that happens. And there are certain types of coercive behavior they could ask for, or they could sort of indicate. The upside of what Sam did was that he told them that he already had agreed to do, a public expose, that he intended to publish it and share it because it's the people's information and he's a private citizen. He also said the same thing on Twitter. He said the same thing when he was out talking to Shawn. So all of these things are really relevant. The craziest thing for me is when I was on the phone with the folks at the Bureau, and this is an indication of where we're at right now. And this is why you have to share stuff publicly to people. The people that I talked to at the FBI, one, they didn't know who Shawn Ryan was. And to me, that's actually fairly mind-blowing, to the point where I got a phone call the next day, and I've shared it with Jeremy, who's up here on stage. I shared it with Shawn. There is audio of them calling and asking for a confirmation of the spelling of Shawn Ryan's first name because they wanted to make sure they were thinking of the right Shawn Ryan. And then they asked me very explicitly, we don't know how podcasts work. This was the agent that was doing the interview. Can you tell me, how did the interview process work? Do they do them live? Are they taped? Like, how do you do it? I'm like, I'm not Shawn Ryan and I don't do his podcast, but I know how it works because I've seen it and I'm pretty confident they tape it and they edit it because he's got 3 camera angles. So, you're going to have to talk to Shawn about that, guys. The fact that you would have a federal investigator, an 1811 series with a top secret clearance working in counterterrorism, who claims not to know what the word VBIT is, or at least the initials of it, doesn't understand how podcasts work in 2025. You'd think that is stranger than fiction right now. But that's part of the reason why it has to be shared and why you need to have this stuff in the public, because they applied pressure that you're not able to do otherwise. They did something that we didn't see at the Covenant School out there in Tennessee. It's stuff that doesn't get happen, like the Pulse nightclub. All of these kind of people who have written some kind of document, left some sort of format, and then we left it in the hands of the feds. You get this like convoluted bullshit because they do not feel like they owe you an explanation. That's the downside of the federal intelligence and the federal law enforcement side. They don't actually think they owe Americans anything. And if you guys have watched how they've behaved over the last couple of years, it's my single biggest gripe. This is America's information. They act like an intel agency and that their intelligence is basically a one-way street. And so what these guys did is really, really important. And I listened right at the beginning because I wanted to hear how it was presented. The presentation was as follows. It was the same thing that was said to me. We can't verify 100% what this is. Some of the information checks out. And if you're doing your job, and I think Shawn did a great job of doing this, it's like trust the audience. Here's some information. Here's a data point. Go out there and think what you want. He didn't tell you what to think. I listened. Sam didn't tell you what to think, and when he was making a speculation or giving his opinion, it was very clearly stated, this is my opinion. Here's what I think happened. Here's what might be the case. Here's some speculation. That's how intel people talk, folks. They talk in degrees of confidence. They don't talk about this definitely happened because who knows? We're talking about a digital trail. So that was the thing. Again, we have audio showing that the Bureau got this information, and I just want to bring up the insanity. He gave you kind of a couple different possibilities of being in part of the PSYOP or whatever. If you present information to the FBI while they're in the middle of a national, let's say a national spotlight criminal investigation, or a counterterrorism investigation, or something that involves explosives like this, and you present false evidence, you probably find yourself afoul of 18 U.S.C. 1001, which we usually refer to as the quote-unquote lying to the FBI, but it's referred to as false statements. If you give them fraudulent and knowingly fraudulent evidence, you're probably looking at least a low-level felony. Whether they'll charge it or not is another animal. That is a fully crazy thing for someone who walks around and has spent 20 years with a top secret clearance, who has worked in the intelligence space, who is not a dumb person, and Sam is clearly not. All you have to do is sort of look at his body of work. This is why you go, okay, fine. So this email obviously got there. The question is what does it mean? Who actually wrote it? Are they impersonating or are they legit? Was this someone in the middle of a mental health crisis, which was something that Sam and I talked about in the first 10 minutes? If you have a decent profile and you have the name, if you have a DOD background, if you have a law enforcement background, people send you a lot of mental illness. And so it's really hard to suss out, hey, is this legit or is this something that is just somebody's crazy fantasy? And a lot of times we don't engage with it. The fact that Sam actually engaged with this and got a little back and forth, it is a net good, a net positive for transparency, and it's a net good for the American people. That's all I'm that's it. And if you guys ever want to play the audio, Shawn, it's all yours.
Yeah, I'll actually post that audio after this live stream here. Kyle, I'm just curious. I mean, we're talking about they're not releasing anything. We talked about previous crimes that they've never released the manifesto, and it wound up getting leaked. Why do you think they haven't released all the information themselves that we presented them as soon as we got it?
So this, unlike a local law enforcement, people are used to seeing some big investigations, maybe a local shooting or like a mass shooting. What they'll expect is that there's a police chief and that person answers to a mayor and that person gets elected by, a pretty small group of folks. And those people want to know the answers. Same story with state police. They answer to state representatives. That can actually be handled pretty aggressively at a local level. And so a groundswell of interest is actually going to move the needle. The FBI is not burdened by that. They have an $11 billion budget, give or take, from Congress. You've seen the way that the deputy director, that's the number 2, and the director of the FBI go out in front of Congress and they thwart oversight. They just they don't even want to talk about things that are obvious and should be answered. Not even in closed session, you find out. They don't feel accountable to the American people. And that's the reason why, it's a massive problem with what is the FBI at this point. It's why we don't have answers about what happened at Butler, PA, not in a way that makes everyone feel really good about it. It's why we don't have answers about what happened at Mar-a-Lago or the golf course down in Florida. Any of these things are of national interest. But you'll notice is that it's a black bag. And people who've worked in local law enforcement know exactly what I'm talking about. The FBI tends to be a one-way street. It's like, thanks for the information. We're never going to tell you anything more. And that is a cultural thing. So you shouldn't expect it, at least not right now. There's no air of transparency. They're essentially a no factory. I've got a couple of open FOIA lawsuits where I've sued the Bureau for information that I know exists because people have told me what it was. And they won't surrender it, even though we know. And I've asked Congress members to help us out because it's about them. And they don't want to get involved because it's ugly. It's going to make them look, kind of silly. At the end of the day, you have a culture of people that are working to say no. They're either going to hide it behind classification or they're going to hide it behind exceptions to the FOIA, which is the Freedom of Information Act. They will use this ad nauseum and they will make you fight. My attorney and I have done at least a year's worth of litigation simply to get the opening and the closing of a slideshow called Congressional Investigations into the FBI by the 118th Congress, which I know is full of unprofessional information. 100% sure, because I know people that were in the presentation and saw it. There's video of it, and they showed me them setting up the podium, and that's all I've ever gotten from them. So these people don't want to share this information. Again, what you guys did was pressure them and made them acknowledge that something exists, because there was no way around it, because your platform is big enough to actually do the squeeze. So double down again. Sam and Shawn did the right thing, and the fact that you guys get to even have a discussion about it as like the American people, that wouldn't be happening without this.
I appreciate that. Hey, I want to move over to Jeremy and Tim Parlatore. You guys spoke with the public affairs officer from the Joint Chief of Staff of the Army. Um, how did that conversation go?
Well, that was one of the weirdest conversations I've ever had with a public affairs officer. I mean, going to the authenticity of this, they obviously were, very desperate to reach out to us. So, they certainly had some information. But then once I got the guy on the phone, he really didn't seem to have the concept of what the content of the email was, and he really, obviously he's trying to protect the reputation of the army, but really what he was pushing me on was to say that, hey, this guy was a very well respected soldier, and everybody, they've interviewed everybody, up and down his chain of command, and they all respected him. They all said that, no, nobody saw this coming. He was a really, fantastic soldier. He was going to do, great things once he got out of the army, and he was very explicit to me that, he was concerned, or I guess the Army Public Affairs was concerned, that if this email was kind of a rambling, incoherent, mental health break, that it could be something put out to the general public, who would get the impression that, and this is his exact quote to me: "If you join the army, you're going to get fucked up." And so he was very much, wanting to make sure that Shawn wasn't going to, um feed the narrative that if you enlist in the army, that you're going to end up as a, completely damaged person, which of course indicates he doesn't really listen to Shawn that much. But it was just a very, very bizarre conversation. He offered that if we wanted to talk to, people within the chain of command to get a clearer picture of what a wonderful soldier he was, we could. And it was overall very odd back and forth.
Yeah, I just want to say, just so everybody knows, I mean, how seriously I take this. I brought Tim Parlatore on board at what, like 8 p.m. that night, just to make sure I was doing the right thing. We checked into things. We looked at the email together. We verified that there was an incident in 2019 that did happen. And and I've done that with a number of episodes with you, Tim. I've sent you
Yep,
things and had you listen to it and say, hey, are we good to go with this? And 9 times out of 10, you gave me the go ahead. So, thank you.
of course. Yeah, now Shawn is always very careful with these things, and he called me up that night with something that definitely wasn't on my bingo card for the week. And we went through it. We pulled the UN report, on the 2019 incident, and we're able to verify that. Um, and then once we had that information, that's when I reached out to the Army Public Affairs officer and got his info.
Appreciate it, Tim. Matt, you got a question?
Yeah, the information that you all had stated on the podcast about the PIO, I believe it was Shu that ended up saying that the PIO had said that the DNA did not match his child. Did they actually come out and publicly make that statement, or did they just leave you all hanging with that?
No, so that was something that it was a very odd kind of statement to me, because um yeah, as he's telling me about what a wonderful soldier he was, I kind of said, well, so what do you think this was? And he said, well, I don't want to speculate, but there might have been problems with his family, and and then he tells me the story that when the FBI went to go identify the body, that to get a DNA match, they went to his closest next of kin, which is his infant child, and that the DNA did not match. And so, they were speculating, well, maybe he got in a fight with his wife and found out that she was cheating on him. And I have no idea if that's true. I mean, quite
And
frankly, the two problems I have with that story, one, this guy is an active duty Army Special Forces soldier. They have his DNA on file to identify. You don't need to go to the next of kin. And two, if the child really isn't his, what mom in her right mind is going to offer up the illegitimate child for a DNA test in this case? So,
right.
and then I looked at the news reports and I saw that an hour earlier she had come out and said, "Oh no, I broke up with him because he was cheating on me." And
Mhm.
so it struck me as more spin than anything.
Well, and Tim, here's my other problem with that. And I think Shawn and a lot of the other people that are up here on this panel can all agree and concur with this, is that being a Green Beret, dealing with infidelity, dealing with marital issues is par for the course. Like, that's not something that
Yeah.
causes GBs to spin out of control and go set off a damn suicide bomb over inside a Las Vegas at Trump Hotel. That to me struck me as something that, and I don't want to go down that rabbit hole because I just want to stick to the facts here. So as a matter of fact, I'm just going to stop myself.
Hey, Scott, can you talk about the conversation you had with Clay Jensen real quick?
Yeah. Hey, Sean. It's kind of similar to, I believe, what Kyle was saying, but I was not dialed into the manifesto or any of the stuff that you were working. I simply received um, some fairly urgent outreach. One from the actual operative himself, uh, with and who was talking about this possibly coming up, and it was news to me. So I immediately just gave you a heads up of, having talked to this individual and, just whatever you're working, just so there's potentially something that, might compromise him. I just want you to hear, what he said. And so that was the first one. And then Clay contacted me later that evening, um, separately, right, and just said that, as you had said earlier, he had similar, he knew this individual, he had concerns that if this dropped and his name was in it, that it could compromise what he's doing in the course of his work. And so both of those, I actually received it from two individuals, one the individual himself, and then let you know just as soon as I could, kind of in the blind, and then you took the actions to redact.
I just want to say again too that that brought a lot of the fact that so many people got contacted by CID or friends of the operative. I mean, brought a lot of legitimacy to the story. And and then when we lined up, the 2019 incident, what it was, what was in the UN report, that it was airstrikes on drug what are narcotic type buildings. When I pulled up the individual's profile on LinkedIn, sure as shit, there it was that he was in some kind of anti-narcotics unit. So, Matt, go ahead.
Yeah, I just want to point out as well that from my own personal knowledge, I know he was, number one, not in numerous province, which doesn't necessarily negate the fact that he claims that he developed, what was it, over 120 target packages over there. But in one statement, he ends up saying, and this is where I think a lot of people are having issues with that email. In one statement, he's talking about US 4A, saying that US forces Afghanistan only ended up executing about 50% of those targets that he ended up developing. And in the very next breath, he ends up coming out and saying that US 4A is trying to cover up a bunch of CivCas or civilian casualties that ended up taking place. So they're two contradictory statements, both within the same breath, if you were to read it straight through. One where US 4A is executing these targets in which he developed, but also that US 4A only executed about 50% of the targets due to civilian casualty concerns.